Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who've experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, Myles, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Myles Katz. Myles, welcome.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Myles leads the development of Confluence Retreats, which seeks to integrate nature-based multi-day psilocybin retreat experiences into Oregon's innovative legal framework. And in the process, collaborating with indigenous communities to restore ancient healing practices to the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument. Previously, Myles co-founded the Synthesis Institute, where he served as Director of Business Development, spearheading the development of one of the world's initial legal psychedelic service models. This groundbreaking initiative supported over 1,000 individuals in their mental health journeys until its closure in 2023. Myles, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So before we get going, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so I was born in Manhattan, which is a very noisy, busy place, and had a long journey, including living in Africa for 6 years and Amsterdam to start my previous psychedelic retreat business that ultimately landed me here in Southern Oregon, where we run our legal psilocybin retreats through Confluence.
Nice. So it's interesting because I was born in Manhattan and I'm also in Oregon right now.
Cool.
So how did all this start for you?
Well, I'd say the psychedelic component of it, which is probably the more interesting and relevant component to talk about, started actually while I was living in Kenya, in rural Kenya, for about 6 years. I was in my late 20s at the time, and without having this language, I can see now in hindsight that I was very much a very high functioning, depressed alcoholic. And I was in this lull in life, and I had on the surface, I had everything that I had wanted. I was living in rural Africa, running a social enterprise. So this is a concept I was really into in my early 20s, essentially running for-profit businesses that had a social or environmental mission to help people who lived at the base of the economic period.
This is crazy interesting. How did you even get to this point where you're interested in starting social stuff?
Yeah, I was raised in a family business, very entrepreneurial environment, and I never really thought about following a corporate career path. I was always really interested in business, but really it was instilled with this entrepreneurial perspective on the world. And so I had towards the later stage of my undergraduate at Northeastern University in Boston, I was exposed to this concept of social entrepreneurship, which is using the principles and the tools of business, but having an outcome that's not necessarily financially motivated, but increasing incomes for, the people at the base of the economic period or environmental missions. And there's just really inspiring professor who turned me on to this idea and kind of tilted my whole career path into this broad concept of using business skills to help create positive change in the world.
So where was the genesis of the alcoholism?
Yeah, good question. So my mother passed away when I was a teenager, and I was, I'd say that like up until the time I was 15, when that happened, I would describe my life as a very privileged, quote, normal, upper middle class upbringing. And she was sick for a number of years, started with breast cancer, turned into leukemia. And we were very much a family that acknowledged it, but we didn't have like deep emotional processing tools or techniques. And so when she did pass, I had already started to experiment with alcohol in my, mid to late teenage years. And when she passed, I just kind of dove into that rabbit hole. And,
Mm.
it was all for fun and like to connect with friends. But through a lot of work in hindsight, I can see I was really just self numbing quite a lot. And so I was grateful for that tool and that I'm really grateful that I was safe. I mean, I look back at some of the things that were happening and I must have had a guardian angel looking out for me because it was not a very safe use of alcohol. But yeah, I'd say like it really started with that and carried out throughout my 20s as my relationship with my dad and brother really shifted significantly as we all went our separate ways to process the death of my mom and ultimately, disconnect from one another instead of, lean in and support each other.
So Northeastern University, and was that the kind of entree into the Synthesis Institute in a sense?
No, so my experience at Northeastern University led me to want to live in Africa and work in startups that helped, people, like essentially the global poor, base of the economic period, people who lived on $2 to $3 a day on average in developing countries like Kenya. And so I lived in Kenya for 6 years and I worked on a pretty interesting business that ultimately puttered its way along through the years, still exists today, but never grew the way we had hoped. But we essentially worked with rural farmers in Africa, collected a local indigenous tree nut that they had on their properties and processed it into organic oils and agricultural inputs. And I was there for about 6 years working on this other business model. And it was around this time that I started to slip into a more depression based state.
Now, let
I
me
knew,
interject for 1 second.
yeah,
So
please.
during this time, did you engage in any kind of therapy?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Nope. Nope. I
Oh,
was still drinking as a lot
okay.
of us do in Western culture in their
Yep.
mid to late 20s, binging a couple times a week, but no conscious awareness of therapy or anything. Not even in
Okay.
the place to admit that I could benefit from it.
Did you kind of consciously or intentionally, quote unquote, process your mother's death?
No, I always had a very spiritual connection with that experience and with her even after she passed, but I didn't do any conscious processing of grief or anything of
Okay.
that nature. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It was really in my late 20s as I slipped into a depression. I knew I didn't want to come back home to the US, but I knew it wasn't really going so well in East Africa, despite the fact that I had this dream career, dream from where I was at as an undergraduate. And I started to very slowly experiment with psychedelics in very unintentional ways. And started out with like an experience once every year or two. And in 2016, I was at a Burning Man type festival in South Africa, and I had my first experience with LSD. And this was really the one that, as they say in the psychedelic world, lifted the veil and made me aware of all the things that I hadn't been aware of through the self numbing. And I lost my appetite to drink alcohol pretty much immediately overnight, which was not an intention at all.
Wow.
And for about 6 months or so, I just had this tingling sensation in like the frontal lobe of my brain, which like at first scared me because I didn't know a lot about psychedelics at the time. And I really was curious if I did some long-term damage. And then as I dug more and more into the literature that was available at that time, which I'm very grateful for, it wasn't as much as available now, but there's still enough that I
Mhm.
could find it on the internet. I was really intrigued to learn how physiologically safe these substances are, some of the safest that we know about from a psychoactive standpoint, how other people have these healing experiences. And it just started this infinite curiosity that I still have today about how these tools, psychedelics, can be used to help us improve our well-being, whether that's treating mental illness or what I refer to as moving up the mental health spectrum from functioning to flourishing, which I think of as more my personal journey. Because I was not, while I can look back and I could say I probably should have been diagnosed and treated, I never was because I was so high functioning in an everyday sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really like an interest of mine still to this day is like, I know there's a whole world of psychedelics for mental health treatment, and there's no reason that shouldn't be acknowledged. But I think something that we're yet to talk about more intentionally as a culture is moving from like just not being unwell to like what is it like to be flourishing and living with purpose and having meaningful connections with ourselves and nature and others, and maybe even, spiritual connection for some. And
I love
so
that distinction. Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
Um, so let's talk about Confluence, how that started.
Yeah, so I had a very unique experience of being able to work legally with psychedelics since 2018. So the precursor to Confluence was an organization called Synthesis that ran legal retreats out of Amsterdam, where psilocybin is legal. It's not regulated like it is in Oregon, but it's legally available. And so that company raised venture capital and built a very professional therapeutic multimodality approach to psilocybin group retreats. And at the time, it was quite ahead of the game. 2018 was like right before this most recent surge in research and breakthrough therapy designation and media about psychedelics. And so out of all the entrepreneurial projects I've worked on, it was really right place, right time. It's a big factor of being a successful, startup. And so that company lasted for about 5 years. We had to do a lot of twisting and contorting to survive the pandemic. And in a lot of ways, like it's amazing we did survive the pandemic at all, given that we were an in-person group retreat business that, relied on travel. But we did. And I actually relocated from Amsterdam to Oregon in the middle of 2020 because we had foresight on what was coming in Oregon, which is the first legal regulated access model for psilocybin anywhere in the world, still to this day. And what the significance of that from a safety, from a helping more and more people come into this work. And so I relocated middle of 2020 before the new law in Oregon actually passed, and it was successful. And I have a funny, ironic story that I was in Oregon for over 2 years before my company failed. And the reason for failure is, kind of a longer story about like the contorting and twisting we had to do to survive the pandemic, the influence of outside capital in, these businesses. But long story short is I was on the sidelines. I had started a family in Oregon and my business had failed. And it was about 3 months later, the first legal centers started opening. So my whole identity and my whole like reason for being there was this type of work I wasn't involved in.
Mm-hmm.
And I really took a lot of time to process that failure. And I wasn't even sure I'd want to work with psychedelics again. It felt very complex. I couldn't intertwine like my passion for the experiences with the failure of that company. And slowly I started getting involved in one of the local licensed centers in our town in Ashland, Oregon. And just for fun, just passion, helping Brian and Michelle, I still work with them today. They run this place called Omnia Group. And just learning how much I did have to contribute, the fact that I had 5 years of legal experience before anyone in Oregon, which, at this point in time, the most anyone has in Oregon is 1 year of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, and as I slowly got involved in that, I was a little bit heartbroken that most of the experiences happening in Oregon are people flying in, getting a hotel room, Ubering to their session, Ubering back to their hotel room, and then flying out the next day. And as someone who spent 5 years helping to set up very professional, multimodality, well-held, multi-day experiences for people, I have a sense of how much of the magic of the psychedelic experience dissipates as soon as you scroll through your phone that evening or, get on the TV in your hotel room. And so just reconnecting with that and wanting to create a program and a structure where people can still have that depth of what I would call the psychedelic experience container, where, they can really be immersed with just their intention and the experience for 3 or 5 days and be in a supportive group of other individuals and, you know, basically weaving together like that synthesis style of retreat that we had developed over the course of 5 years with $10 million in backing and probably iterated on 50 times with like what was available in Oregon, which is the first legal regulated framework. So from that, I started Confluence Retreats as a small nonprofit. And the note on the small nonprofit is it's, a part of my integrating the lessons and the failure of venture capital and not, just wanting to keep a healthy boundary with the nature of our capitalistic system and how that can really influence a lot in how people operate day to day. And especially when we get into really deep healing work like psychedelics has the power to do. And so, yeah, Confluence hosts 5-day programs with 2 psychedelic experiences, just like Synthesis did. And then I also work with people one-on-one to set up mini retreats where we still, stay in cabins in the woods and take care of all the meals and do all the prep and integration activities. But, just for people who either know they're not suited for a group experience or sometimes the timing and dates don't work as well. So, very small scale compared to what we were doing with Synthesis, but still really impactful. And I think just showing in the state of Oregon and as this legal framework evolves that it doesn't all have to be a quick in and out clinic experience. Something I share with clients and maybe for listeners it might be helpful is Johns Hopkins research has shown that a very large percentage of people, somewhere in the range of 80 to 90% of people will quantify their psilocybin experience as one of the top 3 or 5 most meaningful experiences of their life.
Wow.
And so I ask people to consider having one of the most meaningful experiences of their life and sitting alone in a hotel room afterwards, in a new city. And so I'm glad to hear that people still have good experiences that way. I rarely still work with people that way, but I also know the more you can put into setting up a structure to be supported and, not have to try to figure out Uber Eats on your phone after the session. Like, you can hold on to like the magic of the experience even more and ultimately get more out of it.
There's an understanding, I think a generalized understanding that psychedelics probably help most often, can help with mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
But talk about why that is. Why necessarily would that help?
Yeah. There's a great book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. And there's a couple of things that he points to in this book that I think are really helpful to use as a reference for this answer. But, on a grossly oversimplified level, we can look at depression as stress about the past and anxiety about stress about the future and PTSD as stress about a particular event. And so why can psychedelics help with all these different conditions is they're helping us get beneath the surface of these conditions. Like, what is it about my past that has led me to feel depressed or anxious or have this, triggering connection to this traumatic event? And it really helps us get to the why. We don't have a lot of techniques in the modern healthcare system that looks at why. It's mostly about suppressing symptoms, things like antidepressants and other techniques. And so with psychedelics, we're really getting a really powerful opportunity to look at why and what's behind the surface and what are the root causes of some of these things so that we can reorient. And something that is understood, but not, incredibly well understood is the neuroplasticity that psychedelics give us after the experience. So you might hear this term if you're researching psychedelics, but they're shown to help our brains be more flexible and make new connections easier. And in practice, what that is pointing towards is it's easier to change your behaviors or get new insights. And so this author, Michael Pollan, calls psychedelics a PhD in the obvious, which I really like. because he comments on how like the person in the clinical trial for smoking cessation will have the experience on psychedelics in the journey of their lungs turning black and collapsing. And for whatever reason, to that person's subjective experience, they'll really connect with like the harm they're doing to themselves by smoking cigarettes. They don't need to take psychedelics to know that it's bad for them.
Right.
But there's something about the experience that really makes the obvious really like I think of it as like going from a cognitive knowing to like a felt sense of knowing. And once you know it in your bones, it's a lot harder to ignore it and not do something about it.
Really, really cool. I love that.
Yeah.
PhD in the obvious.
Yeah.
Loved your answer. Appreciate that. So the listeners here, we've got people in the mental health field across the
Mm,
mental health spectrum, various types of therapists and coaches, and people who identify as survivors as well.
mm.
So, what do you say to them in terms of how this something like this might be beneficial for them, whether
Yeah.
from a therapist perspective, maybe recommending to a client, let's say,
Hmm.
and even from a client's perspective?
Yeah. Well, well, I love that question. Thank you. And I think the main thing I'm hoping to help get out into the world right now is that there's such a huge surge of interest in psychedelics. Um, and people are going to Costa Rica and Jamaica for these retreats. People are just microdosing on their own at home. I'm getting Facebook ads all the time for psilocybin microdoses, which is not fully legal at all, but somehow they're doing it. And so, what I think is helpful for people to know about is that there is a legal regulated framework in Oregon that people can tap into. When we started our previous business in 2018, the idea that we would get a therapist recommendation for a client to come was a laughable matter. And now a lot of the people I'm talking to for programs are being told by their therapist that they should come check this out. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really good use of the model in Oregon. Like it's far from the most comprehensive therapeutic support system for these experiences, but it can be it's flexible enough to be really easily paired with an ongoing relationship with a therapist or with, an addiction recovery program. And I tell clients all the time, like, if I could wave a magic wand, I would have every single client, regardless of their intention, like having a long-term relationship with a therapist. I have that for myself. Like, and there's this nature where, like, no matter what engagement we have with a client around the psychedelic experience, even if it's for multiple weeks before and after, the the kind of insights and the ahas and the mental flexibility will continue to unfold, usually for months after the experience. And it's just a different support structure, a different incentive structure for an ongoing weekly, for example, therapist to have with a client versus like the one I have with clients is like, I'm here to maximize your outcomes for this one experience. And I'm not trying to be your therapist. I'm not trying to replace that. And so I don't think there's a lot of people that really understand that it is available and legal and there are safe places to go to for these experiences. Um, so yeah, that's kind of like my main answer to that question.
Yeah. So as we kind of wind down here, I know you talked a little bit about the process of coming to Confluence retreats, but more specifically, uh, who's it for?
Yeah, it's for a wide range of people. I mean, I think it's generally for people who are already curious and exploring psychedelics, and that could be I did it 30 to 40 years ago as a teenager, and I'm ready to, kind of go inward and deeper. It's for people who've never had an experience before. Increasingly, I'm talking to people who are experimenting on their own and microdosing on their own and are ready to go to a safe professional setting to like have a full dose experience. Um, I'd say that ideally people have at least some therapeutic context. They have a preliminary sense of like where their trauma may be coming from in childhood or and ideally they have an ongoing therapist relationship, and they're ready to take that next step. They're ready, but they're mindful. They want to do it in a way that's safe and feels good and isn't like on the beaches of Jamaica, where they're not, as professionally held and definitely not regulated. I'll just say that there are great places to go that are not Oregon, but I do think the regulation provides a lot of safety and structure for people psychologically to go into these experiences. And so, yeah, there's a small number of people who are better supported one-on-one instead of in a group setting, although I really personally believe in the value of communal support structures and healing as a group as opposed to individuals. And then there's a very small amount of people who are not quite ready or might need additional support or additional medical clearance before they come. But yeah, so it's pretty wide ranging, and a good facilitator will be able to tailor the experience and help support you in figuring out if this experience or this connection is right for you. There's about 300 people that have their facilitator license in Oregon. So I always tell people, like, first and foremost, you really need to feel safe and trusting with the person you're doing this work with. And that can take shapes in lots of different ways. It could be male, female. It could be life experience similarity. It could be, someone's knowledge about the topic, and ultimately, you got to be really consenting and comfortable with the path you're going to try this.
Okay, so let's say we've got someone who's interested, listeners are interested, they want to reach out to you. Let's say they are interested in the communal support aspect. They reach out to you. What can they expect in terms of steps?
Yeah. So everyone, before I work with anyone, I do complimentary 45-minute, I call them exploration calls with people. So part of that process is filling out a very brief 2 to 3 minute health safety questionnaire, and then also booking a 45-minute call. And during that call, we'll talk about your intentions, why you're interested in psilocybin. I'll get a sense of you, you'll get a sense of me and us at Confluence, and then we can answer all the questions you have about the programs, and that's required for everyone before they come into it. We have small group programs, so one quote bad apple could really spoil the group experience. So it's a way that we assess to make sure everyone in the group is going to be a good supportive fit. And and then we start our formal preparation process about 20 days before the retreat. And that's administrative intake, but also internal preparation. What are the things you can do at home before you come to us in person to get ready for the experience and start to peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, to give psilocybin a better chance of, helping you discover things beneath the surface. And then, we take care of everything on retreat. So it's just about getting yourself to Southern Oregon. And we work with you for a period of a few weeks after the retreat remotely to make sure you're getting all the support that you need to integrate your experience. And then, continuing your healing journey and taking what you get out of the experience and really turning it into meaningful, lasting change in your life.
How many people in the small groups generally?
It's up to 8 clients in the small groups, and we would have 3 facilitators in a group of 8. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So Myles Katz of Confluence Retreats, what's the best way for people to reach out and learn more?
The website is confluenceretreats.org.
Okay.
And you'll see a button to book a call on that website pretty easily. And then you can always reach out to support@confluenceretreats.org, and we'll get that email responded to right away.
Awesome. All right. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Myles, you have this way about you that is awesome. It just instills not just, obviously you're knowledgeable, but you just seem so passionate in a very kind of quiet and confident way. I love it.
Thank you.
I love to have you back.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Look forward to it. All right, man. Take care.
All right, you too.
All right, bye-bye.